Hear that? Believe it or not, summer is just around the corner. Luckily, Armor All, America's most trusted auto appearance brand, has what your car needs to get that perfect summer shine. Plus, now through May 31st, we'll give you $5 for every $20 you spend on Armor All products. That means car wash pods, protectant, tire shine, you name it. Find out how to get your $5 rebate at armorall.com. Armor All, less work, more clean. Terms apply.
This episode of the Single Tracks podcast is sponsored by Stio. Stio makes functional mountain lifestyle apparel for both the epic and everyday moments in life. Hey everybody, welcome to the Single Tracks podcast. My name is Jeff, and today I'm talking with Charlie Kelly, who's a man who can claim many firsts in the sport of mountain biking. He was the first to promote a mountain bike race. He co-founded the first company that sold complete mountain bikes and even started the first mountain bike magazine, Fat Tire Flyer. He's known as one of the founding fathers of mountain biking, and he's a member of the Mountain Bike Hall of Fame. Thanks so much for joining me, Charlie.
Well, thanks for the call.
The first thing I wanted to ask you is just, when you were starting out, did you ever imagine mountain biking would become such a phenomenon?
Well, it would be pretty hard to imagine that from, depending on what stage you're talking about, but at the stage when there were maybe 7 or 8 people with modified bikes that you practically had to make out of flint. No, it would be pretty hard to project that. I remember one conversation, one of my friends got pretty excited and said, this will be in the Olympics someday. And I was kind of dismissive. I said, that's about as likely as an American winning the Tour de France, So, you can tell what era that was from.
Right. Right. So, but you guys were pretty passionate about it. I mean, was it the kind of thing where you did it and it was so much fun? I mean, could you imagine other people enjoying it to the degree that you did?
Well, it was so hard to get into at first because you had to modify this bicycle in a very specific way. First you had to find one of these old things.
Right.
And then you had to do the modifications that really, most of them took place at the house that I shared with Gary Fisher and Alan Bonds. But it was really hard to get into. You had to be passionate just to get there.
Right.
And if you had the equipment, it was because you already had the passion.
Right.
So, but really, it was a goofy hobby shared by a dozen or more people. Not that many people, really.
Right. Well, what was attracted to you about mountain biking in those really early days? Like, what made it different or more exciting than, BMX or road biking or even cyclocross?
Downhill. And there is no comparison. I've been riding road bikes for a long time, but there is no comparison between downhill on dirt and downhill on a nicely paved road. And we found that out. Actually, the first experience that I had, other than being a kid, was the day that Gary Fisher and I and another guy just took our town bikes, just one-speed town bikes, out on a trail, and we pushed them and walked them and whatever for a ways, and then turned them around. And it turned out that even on $15 worth of junk, coasting downhill on a dirt road is pretty much fun, and it's actually quite a bit more fun than chasing the guy who's on your bike laughing while you are running behind him, because we only had 2 bikes and 3 guys. But anyway, even on junk, downhill on dirt is fun.
Yes.
And the bikes are no longer junk.
Right. Bikes have definitely changed a lot. What was the demographic like back then with your, sort of that first core group of riders? Were you all sort of similar ages and backgrounds?
Mostly, although there was one member of our squad that he was actually turned 50 years old. I didn't realize this. Turned 50 years old the day of the first repack downhill.
Wow.
And he was a retired firefighter. They get to retire fairly young, but everybody else was between the ages maybe 25 and 30. A little bit older than children.
Right.
But maybe not full grown yet.
Right. Yeah. So, for people who don't know, you all were getting started in Marin, which is part of the San Francisco Bay Area. And today, the Bay Area is known for generating a lot of innovation. There's these huge global successful tech companies like Apple and Google there. So, would you say, is there something unique about the Bay Area that maybe helped mountain biking catch on with like a broader audience? Like, do you see yourselves as sort of pioneers or like tech pioneers in any way?
To some extent, we were just the right people standing in the right place at the right time, because we were not by any stretch the first people to take an old bike out there and coast down a dirt road.
Right.
I'm pretty sure that had been happening for quite a while. The difference between us and I guess every other group that might have done that is that we were also mostly road racers. And so I had this 50 plus pound converted Schwinn bike, and I also had an Italian hand-built racing bike. And if you set the old Schwinn next to the racing bike, you could say, actually, I see some room for improvement here. And but the room for improvement had to start with someone who could build a frame. And maybe the difference is that because we are road-oriented, or not completely, but at least partially road-oriented people, we understood the modern concept of frame building. Mm-hmm. And I felt that if someone would build a frame for this purpose, it would be a lot better bike than what I was riding. And another factor that maybe is not as well known is that those bikes did not last very long under me or most of my friends, because they're built for kids to deliver newspapers on.
Right.
And they're not built for some 200-pound fool to be descending, 1,300 feet, which was the difference in elevation on repack,
right,
in a little under 5 minutes. And I'm sure there's a formula that will tell you how much heat is generated, but it was considerable. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is that I rode that bike everywhere for my town bike, and eventually I would just fatigue the frame because it was just not built for a guy who raced bicycles.
Right. Yeah. So was that unique at the time to have, you mentioned Joe Breeze, and I guess Tom Ritchie was building frames around that time too. Was that going on in other cities? Were there people building bikes sort of from scratch?
Well, there were other people converting old bikes in a similar fashion to what we were doing, because we actually picked it up from some other guys that we saw. But as far as building a frame for that specific purpose, as far as I know, Joe Breeze was the first person to do it. And I leaned on him for most of a year before I talked him into doing it. And it's kind of ironic because now Joe Breeze, of course, is an internationally renowned bicycle designer.
Right.
And I spent a year talking him into designing the first bicycle that he designed. And I wouldn't suggest in a podcast that Joe Breeze owes an entire career to me.
Maybe just part of it.
Because that would be unfair.
Right. Right. Well, that's interesting to me too, because today when I think of custom bike frames, that's kind of like a really elite thing, or that's something that you do if, you have a lot of extra money or whatever. Was that a big deal back then? It seems like you were pretty dedicated if you were willing to go to the lengths of having a custom bike designed and commissioned.
Well, that's true, because really you could go into a bike store, and if you had the kind of money that it took, you could leave with a pretty nice Italian or French, whatever, race bike, mm-hmm. and you could buy it off the shelf. Now, if you are going to have one built by a custom frame builder, and this is really actually kind of key to the whole origin story. If you're going to go to a custom frame builder, then you're going to go with 8 pages of specs, because you can buy a pretty nice bike off the shelf, right? So
right.
What is it going to cost? Why would you spend 3 times the money on that bike frame if you're not going to ask for something actually totally unique?
Right.
Okay. Now, Tom Ritchie had been building bike frames for 7 or 8 years. He started when he was 14, 22 when I met him, actually, and had built over 1,000 bikes. And when Gary Fisher he saw Joe's bike. He came and raced on repack and had seen Joe's bikes. And Gary Fisher had asked him to build a bike similar to Joe's. And Tom Ritchie realized almost immediately that first, for building these new kinds of bikes that weren't called mountain bikes yet, first, you don't need to buy that $150 double-butted tube set. You can use straight gauge tubing, and it costs you $20
Right.
for that tubing it takes to make a mountain bike. As long as you're using straight gauge, comes right from the foundry, and just pick the sizes you want. Okay. First, so the tube set's quite a bit cheaper. Second, he realized that nobody's going to come to him with 8 pages of specs on this bike, because he can do 2 sizes or whatever, small variations, and build essentially mass produce them as much as you can do in a garage. But what that meant was that he could spend a morning cutting 50 tube sets, because they'd all be identical, and then start welding in the afternoon. And essentially he could make 5 or 6 of these new kind of bikes in the same time it took to build a custom road bike, and it would cost him maybe a fifth as much for the tubing. And so the Tom Ritchie profit motive does not escape Tom Ritchie, and he thought, well, I'll just build a few more of these. And then he found out, of course, that the only people that were tapped into that market were all in Marin County, and he hooked up with Gary Fisher, and then by coincidence, me, because Gary and I were pretty well connected at the time, and the three of us changed the world while changing each other quite a bit also. It was actually a partnership that was doomed from day one, but it was really what it took to get this thing off the ground. And I'm still not sure about, whether we made it happen or whether it happened around us,
Right.
All I know is that we sure got a pretty good seat to the greatest bicycle adventure of the 20th century.
Right. Absolutely. So, right. In 1979, I believe, was when the three of you formed Mountain Bikes, which was the name of the company. And you all were delivering complete bikes, the first to do that. Is that right?
Correct. And because Tom would build the frames, and actually Tom could build a whole bike, but I can build a wheel. Tom can build a wheel, but I can't build the frame. So Tom, you build the frames, I'll build the wheels. And it was, like I say, it was a unique partnership because all 3 elements were required, but the doom of the partnership was sealed on day one, because the business, there was no business plan. It's like, hey, let's sell these bikes.
Right.
Because you didn't see, we're thinking, 10 or 15 of these a year. It's kind of a glorified hobby, not so much a business as a hobby that we might make a little money from.
Right.
But the demand, as we now know, we were wrong about a lot of things, but we didn't see the demand coming. And also, we didn't see that Tom Ritchie would just crank out dozens and dozens of these frames, because they were so much easier to build for him, and
right.
And so Tom, everybody brought tremendous enthusiasm and not much of a plan.
Right. Well, I mean, it reminds me so much too of the Apple computer story. I mean, same kind of thing where people were interested in computers, and there were these partnerships formed, and just so many parallels. I find that really interesting. So back then too, people were calling bikes off-road bikes. I guess that was the more generic term. But today, obviously, we call the sport, it's all based on, it's called mountain biking. So why do you think that term stuck on? I mean, that was what you chose for your company. Did people start using that term because your bikes were just so ubiquitous, or was it, the quality? It's like mountain bike was the best off-road bike you could get. Like, what do you think made that the more popular term?
Well, it's an interesting story, because Gary and I, we formed the company, and we thought, well, what are we going to call ourselves? We call ourselves Mountain Bikes. And we paid a trademark attorney to file for the trademark on that name. And this is what I learned about trademark law. And there were only 2 trademark attorneys in Marin County at the time, and I picked the one that was the shortest bike ride. Because, hey, and I don't know if I picked the right one, because he failed to secure the trademark on our company name. And the reason is that you cannot trademark a description. Hey, who knew this? Trademark attorneys are supposed to know that. Right. But anyway, and so, for example, you can't trademark red car, right? And so he gets a note back from the Commerce Department that administers these things, and it said, well, are these bikes made to be ridden specifically in the mountains? Well, this is what you paid the guy to know. And the proper answer was no, it's a bicycle, ride it in a parking lot, wherever, but he said, yes, of course, they're built for mountain use, and that made it a description, and our trademark was denied. Now, we knew that, but the rest of the bicycle industry did not know that, and it's not like we were sending out press releases that we don't own the name mountain bikes. So Bicycling Magazine actually ran a contest to decide what to call these machines that you can't call mountain bikes because that's a brand name. And the winner was the clumsy handle all-terrain bicycle. Well, when's the last time you heard anyone use that term?
Right.
Anyway,
it's been a while.
But at some point, about maybe a year and a half after we were denied that trademark, somebody actually did the research and found out, and we were busted, and it went generic. Our company name was one word with a capital B on the bikes.
Mm-hmm.
It is now, lowercase 2 words.
Right. And it's not just a noun anymore. I mean, it's a verb too. You go mountain biking.
It's like a lot of words can be the noun, the verb, or the adjective, and let's leave out the most important one of those. But anyway, mountain bike, who gets to put words in the dictionary? And we did.
Yeah.
So a small satisfaction.
Yeah, it's got to be exciting.
Yeah.
So we were talking about the bikes too, and you're talking about some of the tubing choices that were made early on. But I was reading there was an early review of your mountain bike in BMX Plus magazine. And in the article, there's this picture of Tom Ritchie holding the bike above his head to show how light the bike is.
Actually, that's Gary Fisher. He's wearing a Bombers. That's in the jersey he's wearing says Bombers on it. It's actually a roller derby jersey from the Bay Bombers. But that's Gary Fisher holding the bike over his head. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because, I started mountain biking probably in the late or early 90s. And I always wondered why, as mountain bikers, we did that. You'd be out for a ride and someone would hold the bike up over their head and take a picture. Yeah. I mean, I guess that's because mountain bikes were surprisingly lightweight for being so durable, right? What were the bikes? What did they weigh back then? Do you have any recollection?
Yeah, actually, when Joe Breeze first delivered his my bike, Breezer number 2, that bike was monstrously heavy, lighter than the Schwinn, but still monstrously heavy, probably in the neighborhood of 35 or 36 pounds. Okay. And part of the reason was that the rims and tires had not yet come on the market that really were the quality that we needed, because we had to use steel rims and these Uniroyal knobby tires that were designed in the 30s and hadn't been changed since. Wow. And cost $3. That was actually one of the jokes is, man, we're selling a $1,300 bike with $3 tires. But anyway, when the alloy rims and lighter tires came out in 1979, that knocked 6 pounds right off the bike right there.
Oh, wow.
And when you take that off your wheels, it's like, running with weights on your feet forever, and then, then going barefoot or something. But it's like, that was a huge breakthrough. And so, okay, our bikes were then weighing on the order of about 28 pounds for the Ritchie bike, which was a much lighter frame than the Breezer bike. And now, of course, you got full suspension mountain bikes that weigh what my Italian race bike did in the 70s, around 21 pounds.
Yeah. But you look at the enduro bikes today, these are full suspension and they have dropper posts and all kinds of other doodads on them. But, if you can get one under 30 pounds today, you're doing pretty well. 28 pounds, that's a pretty high end bike. So it's interesting to me that we're not too far off, at least in terms of the more aggressive bikes.
One observation that let me make about the bikes that I'm riding now, and a couple of observations. First, we started riding those old Schwinns because they were relatively bulletproof, especially next to your Italian bike, and And then we went to the multiple geared conversion. Turned out that those were, man, you had to keep a lot of repair stuff with you when you went out on the trail.
Right.
And then you got to the the Breezer and the Ritchie first generation mountain bikes, and those were very, very bulletproof. Really tough bikes. But everything you ask for in terms of performance, you're giving up something in terms of maintenance. And so now I'm riding this incredible machine that, if I had to pay for it, would cost $5,000 or $6,000. And a little perk of being who I am. But anyway, but that bike is not going to last as long as my now 30-some-odd-year-old Ritchie, because there's just hydraulic systems. There's so many moving parts.
Right.
And here's another minor observation. In the 80s, most of the mass-produced mountain bikes were, at least at first, cloned off the Ritchie design. And so you got your stump jumpers and your rock hoppers and your Diamondbacks and a number of other mass-produced bikes. And say a Diamondback, 1985 Diamondback. I still see those bikes riding around with the original owner because that design was so robust and straightforward and practical that it doesn't have to be an expensive version to be useful for 30-plus years. Oil that chain, and that bike runs forever. And now the bike that I'm riding, well, there's so much hydraulic stuff on it, that it'll be leaking and whatever, that I don't think you're going to get the kind of durability out of that much more expensive bike.
We're going to take a quick break to hear from our sponsor, but we'll be right back. Stay tuned. Stio is a brand mountain bikers may not be familiar with yet, but the company's mission of designing technical, functional products infused with mountain soul is one I think all of us can appreciate. I tested the Stio OPR shorts this spring and found they vented really well. Yet, looking at the shorts, you probably wouldn't even notice the vents designed to open when pedaling or the strategic laser cutouts. And that's the point. Their products are designed for epic and everyday moments. Head over to stio.com/singletracks to check out their entire pedal collection. That's stio.com/singletracks. Take advantage of deals up to 70% off through their summer solstice sale, valid through June 25th. So do you still have some of those bikes in your shed?
My oldest bike, actually, I went through 4 or 5 Ritchie mountain bikes when I was in the business of selling them because I could. But my 2 oldest bikes right now are Breezer number 2, which is a pretty famous bike, and that is in the Mountain Bike Hall of Fame display. And I have 1983 Ritchie Annapurna. I had, after Gary bought my interest in mountain bikes, I asked Tom to do me a custom frame, and I still have that. And that one went a lot of places with me for quite a few years, but it's now in the retired collection out in the backyard.
Well, what's the oldest bike that you're still riding? Do you throw a leg over any of those early bikes anymore?
Yeah, my oldest bike that I'm still riding is about 3 years old.
Nice. Well, I mean, that's how we all are, I think, as mountain bikers. We're addicted to the latest and greatest. So that's really cool to hear that you're the same way. I want to get back to talking about Repack, the race series and those early races. What was the competition like? Was this a really competitive group? I mean, were you all looking for this competitive outlet, or what was the focus in those days?
Well, when we would go on these rides, because of the terrain where we live, the towns are at the bottoms of the hills, and there's hills on all sides. And so every ride started out with going up. And doesn't matter what you're going up, eventually you'll run out of up and you're on top of something. And no one just like turns around and rides down. You throw the bikes down, you throw the Frisbee around, you break out refreshments or whatever, but you hang around on top of whatever for a while. And a phenomenon emerged, which is that somebody'd look at his bike and it would be on. And you didn't have to say, hey, guys, why don't we risk our lives on junk bikes for no stakes, because it was going to happen anyway. And, and so, when the rides are 5 or 6 people, it's kind of a goof to do these mass start downhills, but the rides kept, as the popularity of our goofy hobby expanded, well, now there might have been 10 of us. And suddenly it lit pretty hairy dicing down these narrow roads when the sweet spot of the road is really one rider wide. And turned out that one of the members of our regular riding group was a 220-pound sociopath. And those are competitive advantages. And it was worth your life to try to pass this guy. And so it was kind of a goof, but man, sure would be fun if that guy wasn't there, And so now as you pushed your bike up to the top of these hills, and it would quite often you push them for half an hour, we talked the subject to death. And we decided that a time trial would settle once and for all who was the fastest on the downhill, because these mass starts, one guy was going to win every one of them just because he was so threatening. And so on that October day, what was it, 22nd October, 1976, 21st, whatever, Joe Breeze knows. I went out there with 5 or 6 of my friends and some clocks, and we held that race that was to decide everything. Well, it turns out there's a reason that they play the other 161 baseball games after opening day. And the reason is that if you play baseball, you like to.
Right.
And it turned out that a couple of things about that first race. One is that losing the race was almost as much fun as winning it, because you got what you were looking for, which was nobody in front of you, okay? And second, it turns out that everybody wants a shot at the title. And so, okay, Alan Bonds, my roommate at the time, won that first event. And, he's hoisting the metaphorical belt buckle, and saying, okay, I'm the world champion. And everybody says, well, sun got in my eyes. And are you going to defend that championship or retire undefeated? Because we're going back out there. And so it turns out, and I'm being a little bit hyperbolic here, but turns out that if you're a champion, you can either defend it or retire. But other people want to compete. And so 5 days later, we were back up on that same hill. And then, I have the records after the first race. I have all the records, because we didn't even keep the records for the first race, because who cared? Who was going to care? But I actually have all the finished results from all the subsequent races. But and within about a week, the guys from the neighboring towns are starting to show up, because there are other guys riding in other parts of the mountain on similar bikes. And we knew each other. It's just we had no reason to ride with each other. Mm-hmm. But once there was a race, now there's people starting to show up. And then people started showing up from Berkeley, across the bay. We didn't even know where. How'd you even find out about us?
Yeah, there was no internet.
Right, that's right. But it turned out that this goofy event brought people together, okay, that had no reason to hang around each other. We all had similar interests, but we had no reason to, share them, because, you guys ride over there, we'll ride over here, no big deal. But once there was a race, there was a reason for other people to come to our part of the downhill world. And also, the other thing about the race is that you start looking for that edge. And like I say, if you're looking at your Italian bike and this 40-year-old Schwinn, you're thinking, well, actually, I can, maybe if I improve the frame or whatever, I'd be faster. And so that really started us thinking about maybe moving into the next phase of building these bikes.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it sounds like the competition in those early days for sure was very good natured and, really was about building community more than anything else. But I'm sure it got very competitive and serious. We see today sort of where we're at. And it seems too, there's a lot of parallels with enduro racing today where, you kind of take your time getting up and people are hanging out at the top waiting for their turn to drop in. To me, that's really cool to see those parallels. What did the times look like? Would you see those times improving You said you have those records from all those races. Did you see the times improve? And if so, how are people doing that?
Yeah, the first winner didn't get under 5 minutes, but it turns out that 5 minutes was a pretty good standard. If you could get in under 5 minutes, you were pretty good at it. And I actually created categories. You were an expert. Anybody who ever got under 5 minutes was forever after that an expert. Wow. And because actually I would hand out prizes, no entry fees, but the bike shops would support the effort. And so just in order to distribute the prizes, I created novice and expert categories. And really the experts, there were only maybe 15 experts because you had to really be passionate to get under 5 minutes. And it's actually hard to describe in current terms how this thing took over our lives. But we hiked up and down that road. We studied it. We practiced it. And as time went on, the fastest riders were all riding very consistent times. And, the top 3 times are separated by only 2 seconds.
Wow.
And so, ironically, there have been people coming out with very fancy downhill bikes trying to shatter the records. They can't shatter the record. And there's a couple of reasons. One is that the high point of the course is actually not at the start. It's about maybe 150 yards from the start. And we just picked the start because here's a spot, a nice place to start the race. Well, there was a big rock there. We figured that rock will never move, so that'll be the starting line, right? And the same thing at the other end. There's a big rock at the finish area, and we figured, well, that will never move, so that's the finish line. And so, but because it actually slopes a little bit upward from the start line, these guys that show up with these really fancy downhill bikes, they can't bolt off the line like a road racer on, and the top 3 times are held by road racers.
Oh, wow.
But, Gary Fisher, Joe Brees, and Otis Guy were all really good road racers too.
Right.
But the start is key, and you actually have to ride uphill at least, 150 yards or so. Mm-hmm. And the modern bikes don't do that very well. And so that's why really the old guys with their junk bikes
still hold the records.
Yeah, yep.
Huh. When you say modern bikes, what do you mean? Have people, from what I understand, the course is no longer open to bikes, right?
Oh, yeah. Oh, no, you can ride it.
Oh, you can. Do people go out there and contest it today on their modern bikes?
They go out there with their, their little timers on their phones, and,
right.
And what is that called?
Strava. Is there a Strava segment?
Yeah.
Cool.
So they Strava that, and people do it unofficially. There's only one day a year when they don't really want you there, and that's during the Thanksgiving Day ride when 1,000 people show up, and they prefer you don't ride 1,000 people through the creek at the bottom. But that's the only day, and nobody minds that too much because we get it the rest of the year.
In 1980, you and Denise Caramagno started Fat Tire Flyer, which was the first magazine dedicated to the sport of mountain biking. And for 6 years, that was the only publication covering mountain biking exclusively. So what made you want to start that? Did you have a background or an experience of running a magazine, or what led you to that?
Like so much of this, it was an accident. We thought briefly that we would have a club for mountain bikers, and so we had a meeting for this club. And what does a club do? Well, let's see. You got your president, and your secretary, and your treasurer, and a newsletter. And I had a couple of articles published by then, and so my girlfriend and I said, we'll do the newsletter for the club. And Fat Tire Flyer. Oh yeah, that's a great name. So okay, so we published this photocopied, funky 8-page little newsletter with not much news in it because really everybody that got it had been at the meeting. Anyway, but made the mistake of putting issue 1 on it, and the club never met again.
Oh wow!
But because it said issue 1, people started saying, "Well, when's issue 2 coming out?" And okay, well, I guess okay. So anyway, and the first 6 or 7 issues were actually I would just type them, photocopy them, and fold them and staple them, and but it was, there was a demand for something in print, and the race schedules, if there's going to be a race, how do you find out about it, all that. And so eventually we went to a real commercial graphic artist and a typesetter, and learned about that stuff. And a couple of years in, Denise and I parted company, and she sold her interest to another guy, and he had inherited some money, which we lost a lot of with the magazine, but had a pretty good time doing it. And really, it was the most creative thing that I've ever really done, because along the way, I learned all of that stuff about old school magazine production, and now, of course, it's all done on a computer. And I was right on the cusp of when it went from physical layout to computerized layout. But it was really fun doing them, the hands-on, with a waxer. I mean, it was a fun thing to do. It was very artistic and creative, and I lost a lot of money. So.
Right. Well, I mean, what's fascinating to me about, your whole story is, just this learning how to do things, trying new things, and really, it's sort of what people call today, like sort of the hacker mentality, where, you're building things and you're doing things that maybe people have never tried before. Do you see that in mountain biking today? I mean, is that, in your opinion, has that sort of carried through?
Well, one thing that I've observed is that when we came into the market, the bicycle market was, let's see, you got your cheap road bikes like Schwinn Varsities or whatever. You had your expensive road bikes, and you had BMX. And that was pretty much the bike market. And mountain biking opened a new niche that certainly the manufacturers didn't see coming, although they obviously jumped all over it. Mm-hmm. But now I see that there are lots of small niches that people are creating and filling. And maybe the latest example would be fat bikes, which wouldn't have happened in California because there's no need for them. But in Minnesota or Alaska, there is a need for things like that. And people created a new niche, a new type of bicycle. And then you got your gravel bikes, which is not really a cross bike and not really a road bike, but it's kind of a new thing that fills a niche that nobody had even noticed before. So I think that what we did was maybe show people that imagination is all you need, and you can create your own market niche for any kind of cycling equipment.
Right. And these days, too, a lot of people like to point out and talk about how at the elite levels, racing, downhill racing in particular, that's where a lot of the technology is being invented. And, people are constantly tweaking and trying to find new ways to get faster. Was that part of it in the early days, too? I mean, were people modifying their bikes pretty regularly so that they could do better in those competitions, or was it less serious at that time?
Well, one thing about mountain biking as opposed to road racing is that road racing, they define the bike, right? They tell you exactly what you can ride, and it's got to measure this and that and so forth. And mountain biking, it's like run what you brung. If it works, we'll all be riding it next week. And so, right. And so much more than road racing, mountain biking is open to innovation. And in road cycling, the UCI has limited the definition of a bike so completely that obviously you can't ride a recumbent in the Tour de France, Right. But if you could race a recumbent downhill and win on it, no problem, Yeah. And so it's just a more open atmosphere to what really is a bike. It's anything that you want to ride, really.
Yeah. So in 1983, speaking of racing, you were instrumental in founding NORBA, which was the first sanctioning body for mountain bike racing. What was the idea behind that? It sounds like part of the idea was to make it a little more official and a little more legit. Is that right?
Well, there was a couple of problems. First is that one of the last repack races that one of the last ones that I put on was one that KPIX, a local TV station, had come out and filmed. A whole bunch of people came out there to be on TV, and one guy broke his wrist. A guy I didn't know, and he sued the TV station because suing me wouldn't have done anything for him. So and he lost because they had better lawyers. But it was a real message to me that, hey, man, you're like actually exposing yourself here, right? Mm-hmm. And so I thought, man, and at that point, I was starting to build bikes with Gary, and my interests were changing. And I just got out of the race promotion thing because it just felt like I was exposed pretty badly. But at the same time, other people were putting on races, cross-country races, all over California. There was Victor Vincenti in Southern California, and there's some guys in Central Coast Clunker Classic, Glenn Odell, and in Whiskey Town, in Redding. Anyway, there were races taking place. It was real obvious that first, it would be nice if we all raced under the same rules first, okay? And second, there was no way we were going to get any kind of insurance to protect these promoters without some sort of an umbrella organization, and that organization would probably have to require helmets, and maybe the model would be the BMX sanctioning bodies. But it was clear that the road racing sanctioning bodies had no interest whatever in what we were doing. So we just formed our own, and the whole purpose was, there were only really two purposes. One was so that we could have the same set of rules for everybody's race, and second was so we could get some insurance to protect promoters. Mm-hmm. And the rules were remarkably simple, 4 or 5 as far as what the bike is, and then a few as far as how the promoter has to deal with marking the course and so forth, But just basically the very least we could get away with in the way of rules.
Right. Well, was this commercially driven, or at that point, was it still, it sounds like it was still just, you all really loved what you were doing and wanted to spread the gospel.
Well, yeah, it was commercially only in the sense that getting insurance was maybe the prime goal,
right?
And the rules were just an outgrowth that, you're not going to get insurance unless you have a rule about helmets and so forth, So really, the rules were byproduct of wanting the insurance, and insurance was really the driving factor here.
Right. Well, yeah. Speaking of helmets, I'm fascinated seeing the photos from a lot of those early events and races and things, and you don't see people really wearing helmets there. But what also stands out to me is guys just in blue jeans and flannel shirts and work boots. What do you see that? Is it interesting to you to see these days that that's still kind of how mountain bikers dress? You guys were setting sort of the style back then, which is pretty interesting.
It's like you're wearing what you walked out the door in the morning to wear.
Right.
It's like, and now, of course, I go mountain biking on a very expensive bike, and I wear a bike jersey, and I wear, cycling shoes and a helmet and all that stuff.
Right.
But really, it just didn't feel like you wanted to be wearing your Lycra and your jersey, because quite often you would put your knee on the ground, and
yeah,
you'd like it to be covered with something. So
right. Yeah, but it seems like in the 90s, there was a lot of that in mountain biking. People were wearing their Lycra and, these really tight-fitting jerseys and things. But now it seems like we're getting back to the roots, where we want to, as mountain bikers, differentiate ourselves, say, from people who are on the road, and where the performance apparel stuff, maybe, at least as mountain bikers, we don't want to look like we're trying too hard.
Well, I generally wear a pair of cargo shorts over my Lycra shorts, and I know baggy shorts are big for the mountain bikers now, because I wear cargo shorts is because they got lots of pockets, and I keep a lot of stuff in my short pockets, and so yeah, I do wear a bike jersey because they are practical for a lot of reasons, but generally gone away from the skin tight ones because aerodynamics are not that important to me.
Right. So what are your thoughts on the mountain bike industry today? Are you excited about where mountain biking is going, or are there challenges that you see? What do you think about your baby in 2018?
Well, at this point, I'm just an old guy talking about what it was like to be young, because really it has gone so far away from where we started that I no longer have the ability to work on my own bike because it has so much stuff on it that didn't exist when I was building bikes. However, fortunately, the local bike shops treat me very, very well. So, really, I am just in awe of where it's gone. But I will point that out once again, that a 1986 Rockhopper that cost maybe $350 then will probably outlast the much more expensive hydraulically controlled bike that I am riding now, because we've gone in the direction of performance and away from and that requires a lot more maintenance. So away from bulletproof and more in the direction of performance. Although, having said that, there are plenty of people making simple rigid frame, more or less bulletproof bikes these days, and I think the fat bike people are onto something. Yeah,
very cool. Well, thank you so much, Charlie. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk about the history of mountain biking, and thank you for all that you've contributed to the sport.
Well, I appreciate the fact that I'm an old guy talking about being young once, and that you want to hear it.
Great. Well, thank you. Well, for more episodes like this one, be sure to subscribe to the Single Tracks podcast. If you enjoy what we do, we'd love to have you rate us in your podcast app. And if you're not stoked, drop us an email anytime, info@singletracks.com, to help us improve. Talk to you next week. Peace.